it's I have sat in on a few of them, and it's actually been really good to sit in on them. And now I get a chance to present work that's extremely timely. Speaking of timing, this is extremely timely for us to be presenting this paper. And you know, we talk about economic recessions, so our topic is a little more timely than any of us would like, I think, including authors. So now, speaking of authors, Tatiana Fedik and Natalia Kimmich are my co-authors. They're at the University of San Francisco and Excel. I have seen at least Natalia and Tatiana will be joining as well in the list of participants. They will be taking notes of your comments, so we look forward to that. All right, so if I can figure out. Okay, so just some background in terms of what people mean when they say restructuring or a restructuring charge. So restructurings are significant in divestment/investment decisions. The goal of these decisions is to reorganize and refocus the firm. They tend to have large charges associated with them when they occur, and these charges often involve estimations of future charges. So you can see in the second main bullet what these charges tend to be. So you get things like employee termination expenses, employee retraining expenses, elimination of product lines, and reorganization of product lines. If you look at the charges, you kind of get the sense that firms are typically doing this because they feel the need to respond to some economic circumstances, usually adverse. Either they've had poor performance or there's been an exogenous negative shock, and they're trying to maintain future profitability and competitiveness. So with that background, what is our goal? Well, we are gonna examine how the timing of a firm's restructuring charges relative to that firm's peers within its industry influences the firm's propensity to build strategic reserves. The strategic reserve has two components. One of them is inflation of the charges at the time that they're booked, and reversals of the inflated charges in the future strategically to accomplish earnings goals. Now, this has been referred to as earnings bats, earnings smoothing, different names. Now, in terms of context, restructuring charges have been a focus of interest in the literature, and partly it's because they're considered positive events almost under the circumstances, if you will. So they are usually associated with positive market reactions. They are taken as signals of proactive management. At the same time, there is a lot of discretion managers have in reporting these charges. So, and these charges can be reversed. So this has led to concerns about big bats, and earnings smoothing has drawn regulatory attention. EITF 94.3 and FAS 146 were aimed at restricting some of the discretion, but by no means has eliminated it. There has been media attention, so anytime you're getting into or out of a crisis, the media's worries about restructuring charges, and this particular quote talks about how when a lot of firms are reporting restructuring charges, some may decide to report more charges than necessary and sort of hide with everybody else. So, so there's been a lot of interest in restructuring charges, and we're interested in the timing relative to peers on restructuring charges, and there's been a lot of interest in that too. So I started thinking about this when I was working on the discussion with Shumin, and came to the conclusion that the timing of asset write-downs is very highly correlated with the quality of asset write-downs, and those considerations would apply to any kind of expenses where there are capitalized costs, like restructuring charges. Now, the difficult or the tricky part is timing is hard to even define, really. Like, it is hard to observe the benchmark. When do managers actually become aware of the need to restructure? So we circumvent that issue by looking at timing relative to peers in response to a common shock. And even in the timing relative to peers, there has been quite a bit of interest. Well, peer effects is a huge literature that I've written a review for in the context of investments. But the peer effect literature goes way beyond that. There have been peer effects in investments and reporting for investments, and there is this issue of the role of peers, or the role of timing relative to peers, which is often referred to in the literature as herding, and has been known to sort of influence everything from IPOs to earnings warnings. So investment and reporting decisions. Now, in terms of linking the timing to the restructuring charge, we kind of think of the first order effect in timing of as being the real restructuring decision, what I'm going to in shorthand call the investment decision. And so if you think about that, there are some firms, when they see adverse economic circumstances, they're going to be proactive in reacting to it. Perhaps they want to be ahead of the curve with respect to their competitors. Perhaps they perceive themselves as more susceptible to the shock. And whatever be the case, they are early in taking actions like restructurings and reorganizations. We're going to call them the leaders. And then the other firms, the followers, are the firms where managers choose to wait. And the waiting is not necessarily a bad strategy, because you get to learn how the economic events unfold. You get to see how the peers are reacting, and that allows you to learn about what's a course of action you should pursue. And these firms typically report restructurings later in the economic cycle, or later in the duration of the shock. Now, what we are going to say is, well, two things. We're maintaining this assumption that the inflation of the restructuring charges is contingent on the timing of the real investment decision, the real restructuring decision. And we think there are at least three reasons we could think of that followers are likely to inflate charges more. The first reason is that knowing what other peer firms are doing helps managers at follower firms assess how the market's going to assess their charges. And they have seen more economic events unfold. So knowing what the restructuring charges need to be absent any inflation, we think gives them a better idea to learn about possible avenues for inflation as well. So in tennis terms, that's known as advantage followers. Remember, we're talking about something that's not so good here, inflation or restructuring charges. The second reason is when you think of the market participants, well, they've seen the leaders report charges. They've seen peer firms reporting restructuring charges. They probably expect similar charges from follower firms. They expect these charges to perhaps be bigger because follower firms are the ones that waited. So maybe the crisis deepened. Maybe they have to take more extensive actions. But when that happens, it makes it difficult for the market to tell the difference between inflation and required responses to economic circumstances. And finally, there are some quasi-behavioral stories that say that markets are less likely to attribute any specific action, in this case, restructuring charges, to managers' discretionary choices or strategic intentions, when a lot of other firms are doing the same thing and doing so before them. That's going to give us our primary empirical prediction. Now, how do we structure the empirical analysis? And here I want to go back to my overview slide. Remember, we're interested in strategic reserve creation. So we look at, instead of looking at inflated charges by using some kind of model which introduces measurement error, we look at ex post reversals of these restructuring charges. So that part of the data is hand collected. We look to look at strategic reversal. We look at the timing of the reversal with respect to meeting or beating of analyst forecasts. And then, in terms of the timing of the restructuring charge, we measure it relative to a common economic shock, the specific economic shock being the 2001 and 2008 economic recessions. Restructuring charges became available starting 2001, and we've seen 2 recessions since then. And unfortunately, we're probably gonna see another one. And then using those recessions, we identify leaders and followers, in the spirit of what I described earlier. And that leader versus follower status, which I'll be talking about more in a minute, is our primary timing variable, if you will. And we use that to predict reversal likelihood of restructuring charges and reversal timing with respect to analyst forecasts. So those are our primary predictions, those red arrows. And so in terms of setting it up on the timeline, the timeline starts with month 0 of a recession as defined by NBER. So the 2001 recession started in March 2001. Some firms are seeing bad times coming, so they start reporting restructuring charges and initiating these actions early. So we think of leaders as those firms that report these charges between month -3 and month +3. And then for the rest of the duration of the recession, when we see restructuring charges, we classify them as followers. So for the 2008 recession, so this one was 8 months long, this one's 18 months long. And so the leaders stay similarly defined, the followers go from month 4 to month +18. All right, in terms of data collection, the one thing of note is that when we look at the reversals analysis, and almost, a huge percentage of our analysis is centered on reversals, that requires hand collection. So I'm not going to go into the procedure for this hand collection, but that's described in the paper. And the other data is from, conventional sources. Now, this is our sample selection procedure. There's a few things going on here, but the things I want you to be aware of for the rest of the paper is we select the first significant restructuring charge for every firm that reports a restructuring charge during the length of the recession. So that is a major sort of determinant of our sample. And by significant restructuring charge, we mean charges that are 0.5% of total assets or higher, which leaves us with 466 firm recession combinations, which we refer to in this table as events, but they are firm recession combinations. And so if you look at these firm recession combinations in table 1 panel B, in the recession in 2001, we have 58 leaders and 108 followers. In 2008, we have 90 leaders and 210 followers. Then if you look at the figures in blue, those are the leaders that remain leaders and followers that remain followers across the 2 recessions. You will see that the followers have a much higher retention rate across samples than the leaders, which just reflects the relative preponderance of followers in the sample. The figures in yellow are interesting and useful because these are the firms that switched status. So they were 13 firms were leaders in 2001, followers in 2008. And then there were 10 firms that were leaders in 2008 and followers in 2001. But there is a significant number of firms that don't overlap. Now, it doesn't mean that these firms don't exist. Remember, our sample is conditioned on reporting a restructuring charge, right? So these firms didn't report restructuring charges or they did, but only in one of the recessions. Okay, so this gives you a sense of the timeline of the restructuring. Remember that -3 to +3, and then the rest of the time. So I'm going to use the 2008 recession to sort of give you a sense for how the data looks. So month -3 to +3, those are the leaders. And you can see from the cumulative percent that of all the firms that reported restructuring charges during the duration of this crisis, 30% were leaders, and the rest are followers. And the followers are actually spread out over time and sort of wane kind of towards the end of the crisis. One of the things we were interested in, given how we developed our hypotheses, is the number of firms that report restructuring charges, peer firms, so firms within the same industry, that report charges in the 3 months prior to the charge reported by any one firm. So think of them as the peer predecessors with restructuring charges, right? So you can see from the data here that the peer predecessors, from here and the 2001 recession, that followers are probably going to have more peer predecessors, which we confirm when we look at how are leaders and followers different from each other. So one of these terms we were very interested in is the number of peer restructuring. So that's the number of firms restructuring in the 3 months prior to the charge reported by the follower. And we're particularly interested in, well, is this just a function of economic conditions? So we threw in industry returns there. The industry returns are measured concurrently with the number of peer predecessors, so 3 months before the restructuring charge is incurred, and then a number of firm-specific variables, which captures the firm's own economic circumstance. And as you can see from column 1, that the number of peer predecessors is significantly different across leaders and followers, and it is not subsumed by industry returns or firm characteristics. Only one firm characteristic seems to matter, and it's more positive for followers. Now, it's not like the firm characteristics don't matter per se. If we took out the number of peer predecessors, so for example, in column 1, these firm characteristics do matter. But the other interesting thing that we noticed is if you go from column 4 to 1, well, I'm presenting these columns in the sort of the reverse order that they're in the paper. If you look at the R-squares at the bottom, you will see that the R-squares decline quite a bit if the number of peer firms is taken out, peer predecessors. So we think it matters. It's not subsumed by firm characteristics or industry returns. All right, now, with that sort of, this is, we present this as descriptive statistics. This is not a testable prediction. Remember, our testable prediction is on reversal, likelihood and timing. So this is our first table on reversal likelihood I would like you to see. The dependent variable here is the probability of a restructuring charge reversal in the 12 quarters after the restructuring charges, in any of the 12 quarters after the quarter in which the restructuring charge is reported. The primary explanatory variables are an indicator for whether a firm is a follower or leader. And the second one is shortfall. And shortfall captures whether the firm experienced a shortfall or a miss with respect to the analyst's consensus forecast with the pre-reversal earnings. Right, so the earnings excluding the reversal of the restructuring charge. And you can see that both the status of a follower and having a shortfall triggers a reversal, if you will. And this is a logistic regression, so we don't do the interaction effect, but we provide marginal effects on follower for when shortfall equals 0 versus 1. So what this data is telling you that followers are 12.9 percentage points more likely than leaders to report a restructuring charge reversal in quarters where the pre-reversal earnings does not meet or falls short of the analyst consensus. Now, we repeat this regression with an OLS, and I'm going to show you the OLS regression because in this one we do include the interaction, followers times shortfall. I'm going to show you the regression results, or I'm going to focus on the regression results with form fixed effects. These form fixed effects, including them, means we are identifying the coefficients of those 23 forms I pointed out that switch status between recessions. And so you can see that followers, when they face an earnings shortfall with pre-reversal earnings, are 10.1 percentage points more likely than leaders to report a restructuring charge reversal. Okay, now that's the reversal likelihood. The other primary result is reverse, and you know, this already with the shortfall, it already has an element of timing in it, right? So we're kind of looking at this both simultaneously, but to kind of nail down the timing piece, we looked at this other table where we think about do managers convert misses to meets or beats with restructuring charges? So for this, I'm going to ask you to focus on column 2. The sample in column 2 is the sample of firms that miss analyst forecasts with pre-reversal earnings. Okay, and so the dependent variable is whether the firm meets or beats the analyst consensus with post-reversal earnings. So if the dependent variable turns on by construction, this is a miss that has been converted to a meet or beat as a result of the reversal of restructuring charges. And so you can see that in this sample, followers load significantly, and what that's telling you that the follower, that coefficients, that marginal effect, is telling you that a follower is 7.7 percentage point more likely than a leader to convert a miss to a meet or beat with a restructuring charge reversal. And then you sort of have the results in column 1 for the full sample of firms as a benchmark. But we repeat the same analysis with OLS. And here too, I want to focus on the results with firm fixed effects, and we get very similar results, right? And here the firm fixed effects are identifying of the 23 firms that switch status. All right, so these are sort of our main results. We have other results, and you know, I'm happy to refer to them if and when you have questions. We conducted propensity score matching, and this is just to match purely on the firm specific characteristics. And in case we'd have the identification of the switchers, but the switchers could have had different firm characteristics between the recessions. So that's why we did this additional propensity score matching. And the results are in my slides. I'm not going to show them as part of this this initial presentation. The conclusion, the empirical conclusion is relative to leaders, followers exhibit a greater likelihood of inflating restructuring charges and of timing the reversals strategically. Couple of caveats, right? So remember, we're thinking of the restructuring decision as first order and sort of developing our hypotheses and what that implies for the inflation of charges conditional on that. It is conceivable that the manager's desire or intent to inflate charges influences their timing. And we don't speak to that. Now, how likely is this? And you know, I've been torn about this, and I discovered that Larry David expresses very well how I feel about this, right? So I don't know, but I'm skeptical. We're talking about the first significant restructuring event during a recession. You know, it seems like that would be driven by first order conditions determining the investment decision, right? The second caveat is that the reversal likelihood tells us that the followers are inflating charges more. Now that could be non-strategic, right? It's just driven by some omitted variable that's nevertheless systematic. But remember what our evidence says. we document, using reversals themselves, we document evidence of inflation and of strategic timing of the reversal. So observationally and in practice, that is equivalent to strategic inflation. And Larry David likes that too. So I'm going to stop here. Our primary takeaway from this paper is that we're documenting an investment timing to reporting quality spillover effect, where the timing is relative to peers. And in the process, it allows us to provide insights into a substantial big bath in reporting quality literature, and maybe tells us what to expect as we potentially, hopefully not, but potentially head into another one of these recession events. All right, so I'm done, and I'm gonna now open up the floor to questions. Like I said, I'll refer to other results in the paper as and when you have questions, or I need to pull up slides.
Thank you, Sugata. Very, very nice presentation. We actually have a lot of questions, and we'll start with DJ.
So Sugata, what you call leaders and followers, to what extent are they customers and suppliers? They may be in the same industry, but a supplier may have a much bigger exposure to customer distress. So their restructurings would be much larger. So I'm kind of thinking of, I know the example is not the same industry, but if you look at airlines and say Boeing, if all the airlines are, distressed, Boeing has to sell planes to airlines. They can't really sell it to anybody else. Or even worse would be in sort of the automotive sector, where you have the big three and their suppliers are more dependent on them. So the restructuring at General Motors may be small, but the whipsaw through the supply chain may be much larger.
So you think the customers are big firms that are restructuring first, and then the suppliers who are small firms are being sort of whiplashed around? Is that your intention?
Yeah, so typically in a recession, who experiences the recession first? It's a demand shock, right? So you're going to see it in consumer durables, you'll see it in retail, and then this is going to whipsaw through the value chain.
So our definition of industry is let's say conventional. So I don't think, and the truth of the matter is I don't know, right? So I don't have the level of data where I can convincingly, or convince myself even, that we only have we don't have farms that are suppliers and customers classified within the same industry. So it is possible that that's true in our sample. We can check this. I mean, we'd have to think through what it means for our study, right? As an economic phenomenon, what you're saying is interesting, and maybe it tells us the relationship between farms and what type of farms in that relationship get to build reserves. But it's something we would have to think about and look at. I can't answer your question, your specific question, to what extent is this that phenomenon, because we haven't looked at it. Is that fair? I mean, yeah.
I mean, one simple pass is you could actually look at all your followers and see whether the leader was a customer, a major customer, or disclose that such.
We can do that. Yes. We could think about. So you're almost thinking about how does the shock spill over to other firms, right? And yeah, we could do analysis like that. Here, it's almost conditional on the timing in our paper, but we could look at how the timing is determined a little bit more. Yeah, fair enough.
Thank you. So the next question is from Miguel.
Hey, Miguel.
Hi, Sugata. How are you? My question is a little bit more about the institutional detail and descriptive statistics about these charges. It will be interesting to see what exactly are these charges. What I've seen is that a lot of these cases are charges for employee layoffs. And then if eventually you don't get rid of the employees, or you can negotiate, these charges can go away. which will be interesting to also contrast to other charges such as goodwill impairments or hard asset impairments, where managers don't have that flexibility, right? So you may not expect to see the same behavior for reversible and non-reversible charges, which I think in the paper needs to be discussed. What gives managers so much flexibility to book whatever number, and then a few quarters down the road or after the recession, reverse that number?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll talk a little bit about that last part of your comment. Data I did not present, I think, kind of tells us that about 5% of the original restructuring charge is being reversed, right? So we don't want to create the impression that all hell's breaking loose with the reversal. It isn't that the entire reversal charge is being, the entire restructuring charge is being reversed, right? So it's not that bad, right? We're talking about inflation, and we're interested in inflation, but we're talking about on average a 5% reversal. Now, the broader point on remind me what your broader point was.
Yeah, that there is flexibility. First,
right, the type of the restructuring.
What are they? What are these restructuring?
The type of the restructuring charge. Got it. Yeah, so we haven't looked at that. As long as it fits the EITF 94.3 definition, it's in there, right? So the restructuring charge is in there. It would be, yeah, I agree that it would be interesting to look at what specific charge is being booked and what specific charge is being reversed, right? Now all of this is hand collection, so it's going to be tough. But I mean, it is interesting. The question is interesting. We could potentially look at that if you're telling me that you find this question interesting and it's worth looking at more. Sure.
I'll tell you why. Because think about Macy's. No, not Macy's. That's a bad idea. Neiman Marcus versus Nordstrom.
Mm-hmm.
It's obvious that Neiman Marcus or other retailers that are doing very badly will take charges before Nordstrom. Mm-hmm. Eventually, Nordstrom will do that too. But then it just means that Nordstrom has a better business model. And then once the recession passes, it's obvious that Nordstrom is going to have more reversals because Nordstrom is going to weather the recession better, right? So the type of charges are important because it has to do whether the charges are taken because of bad business model or because the charges are taken because you're imitating our Nordstrom, let's say. You have a better model, or you are just imitating Neiman Marcus, right?
So in your example, Neiman Marcus is the leader, Nordstrom is the follower, and Nordstrom is overestimating its charges, right? At some level, it's not endogenizing it being a better firm for some reason, right? So it's reporting charges that it then exposed is revealed to reverse later. And not just that, we are finding that they reverse it strategically.
That's why, but let me tell you why it might not be the case. If the charges are taken because of GAAP, it's not just making too many charges, right? If the charges are taken because of GAAP rules, they have to take them, like a goodwill impairment. You mm-hmm. cannot over or underestimate a goodwill impairment, right? You have to take it when the present value future cash flows is less than the recoverable value of the assets, right? So, but you have a better business model, so you eventually will have to revert those charges. That's why I'm very interested in whether the charges are taken in accordance to GAAP or they're just discretionary charges. It's just something to think later.
Okay. I mean, I see what you're saying now. I would like, so you were saying, just so I understand you well, that GAAP makes you take a certain charges. If you are a better firm, you have the luxury of reversing these charges later because you did better. And some of the charges that you had accounted for are not necessary. So
that's correct. And this happened during the financial crisis, in which a lot of banks had to reduce the fair value of a lot of their investments, and even if they had better portfolios, and then eventually those banks experience a larger recovery. But during the crisis, you have to take this charge. This is the procyclicality problem.
Yeah, I like that. I'll think about it. I mean, the one point I'll make is, in effect, though, these firms have reserves. The Nordstorm has a reserve, right? Because what ends up happening is it has booked these charges. It has the ability to reverse in the future by virtue of it being a better firm. We don't take a stand on whether followers are worse firms, but when it does reverse these charges, it's going to have the luxury of doing it and timing it to meet or beat analyst forecasts. That's, I want to hear other questions, but yeah, maybe I can talk about this with you later.
Sure, thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay, so the next question is from Doug Hanna.
Hello, Sugata.
How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. It's pretty clear that the early reporters are facing, or there's more uncertainty about what an appropriate amount of charge would be for them. The later reporters are going to have the benefit of observing all their peers' disclosures already. So it would appear to me that there's more opportunity for strategic behavior in the early reporters relative to the later reporters. Now, I don't disagree with your empirical results, but I'm having some trouble attributing them to the proposed reason in the paper. And I was wondering, could you strengthen maybe a theoretical motivation or something like that to help dispel the second caveat?
So, I mean, look, I could go over the reason we came up with for why followers are likely to inflate charges more, but in the context of your question, what specifically we thought of, there are sort of three things we thought about, and you were kind of raising a question about one of them, which is, well, would leaders or followers have better flexibility in terms of knowing exactly what they're doing and therefore inflating charges or not? Now, if you grant me the luxury for the moment of okay, these guys are inflating charges intentionally and they want to do it in a way that they are not detected, right? So this is not Miguel's world. This is sort of a strategic world. Then the followers, because they have sort of more uncertainty resolved, they also have a better handle on how much inflation they can kind of work into the restructuring charge.
But the market has that information as well. And
right.
the market's expectations are going to take that into account.
Right. And so from the market point of view, right, which brings us to the market point of view, and from the market point of view, there are these effects that say, well, that those are our two next effects, right? Contrast and covariation. The market has a harder time than followers to kind of, relative to followers, figuring out what the degree of inflation in the charges are. And I'm telling you what the hypothesized effect is right now. And the effect there is, you know that the restructurings for the market, what the follower is about to do is actually more uncertain, because the market doesn't know what the passage of the crisis and all these firms restructuring implies for the follower that has delayed its charge for so long. Okay, now it's a fair comment, I think, to say that I don't necessarily buy that, and that's a fair comment. But that's what makes it an empirical question, right? Now, if the market is able to completely unravel this, then you're right. We would have a hard time coming up with a prediction where we would probably still come up with a prediction, but then you would wonder, why are the firm managers doing this in the first place? So that's where we take it to an empirical analysis. But I don't know. Do you find that a reasonable response, or do you have other thoughts on it?
Well, I think it's consistent with the arguments you put forward in the paper. If there was some way to strengthen that expectation, I think it would really help with the attribution issue and help with caveat number 2, which I think is pretty big.
Okay, okay, fair
Thanks.
enough. Yeah. Those caveats are on my mind. So, okay, all right.
Thank you. So the next question is from Fabrizio.
Hey, Sugata, how are you?
Hey, Fabrizio, how are you doing, man?
Thanks for the presentation and for the Curb Your Enthusiasm references. And a couple of quick questions. I mean, one almost on data. To what extent the leaders exhibit additional restructuring charges later on? And in general, how you treat the case of multiple restructuring charges over time from either leader or followers?
Fabrizio, can you please slow down? So can you repeat your question again? Sorry, slower.
How do you treat the case of multiple restructuring charges over different quarters, whether by leaders or by followers? And because that seems to be informative as to whether the leaders took a too small of a charge or things of that sort. I don't know how frequent it's in your sample. And related to that, and maybe to the prior point by Douglas, how do you view the market reaction to the leaders' first wave of restructuring charges? In other words, to what extent the followers' decision is also informed by how the market responds, because the market might signal that those charges are not enough. So now you are pushed to go for bigger restructuring charges, right? So is there a feedback effect there? What's your
okay, so two questions there. In terms of the multiple restructurings, we have not messed with the sample selection. We have only looked at the first significant restructuring. We did look at which, are leaders or followers more likely to report follow-on charges, right? And we don't have significant differences there. And maybe we should report that. We didn't report it because we didn't have significant differences. I was thinking we would, and then we didn't see anything. So that sort of gets at that multiple restructuring basis. Multiple restructuring is part of your question, and we can talk more about it. Now, on the terms of the returns, we have stayed away from market returns, and this is partly based on sort of these. At first pass, we did not want to fight the battle of market efficiency or otherwise, right? And this has to do with Doug's question. And so we stayed away from it. We basically just looked at industry returns, but you've seen that, right? We look at how industry returns influences followers' charges or not. But it's a good idea. I mean, we could look at what happens to the reaction to market reaction to peer firms' charges, how it influences the charges by follower firms, which is sort of closer in spirit to what you were suggesting, I think. Yes, we could. We have not done that. Yeah.
Thank you. So Doug Skinner had to leave the seminar, unfortunately. So we'll jump to Mark Purkowski's question.
Sugata. Okay, so in the paper, you mentioned that there's considerable variation for your hand-collected sample and how firms report their restructuring charge reversals. So in that vein, I was wondering if you might expect that some that report the reversals more directly versus indirectly, whether there's some variation you can exploit there to try and disentangle those potentially more strategic versus non-strategic reversal firms.
So Mark, directly versus non-directly, could you explain that a little bit more?
So for instance, some firms, when they report their reversals, they mention that they use the terms like reversal directly, whereas some firms call it like a non-cash adjustment to the accrual account, maybe more like obfuscating how they're mentioning it. So if you have that hand-collected sample, I wonder if you'd have an expectation that the reporting practice translates to potentially more strategic versus not. You could possibly also. I'm sorry?
You RA for me on that?
Be happy to.
It's a good suggestion. So I think you're thinking about how whether they phrase it differently.
Correct.
So somebody says we're reversing a previously reported charge. Somebody else, using your words, obfuscates, right, and tries to hide it. That's a good thought. No, we have the wording and the place where they report it, so we could conceivably do it, but we haven't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question is from Zayu.
I see.
Hi, my question is related to Fabrizio's question because I noticed from your data selection there are around 215 additional restructuring actions out of sample, so which is around 50% of the firm which did restructured again. So, but you kind of answered my question. You said that there is no significant difference between the first time and second time. So I'm wondering, have you checked the inflation level for the first time and second time? And if the inflation level haven't increased, is that means it's not a like leader or follower story, maybe just some firm fixed effect?
Yeah, so this incident, so what I was not saying is that there is no difference in inflation across the first or the second time. What I was saying is between the leaders and the followers, the incidence of recurring restructuring expenses was not significantly different, right? So that's all I was saying. We have not looked at multiple restructurings. And I think we have sort of enough of on our plate without doing that. And now to the extent that it might help us is sort of the strategic reporting being shifted by leaders into the later charges as opposed to the previous charges. It's possible. So there is something of interest there. We could do that. We have not looked at that yet, but yeah, it is. I mean, these restructuring charges, by the way, after the first one, they tend to decline in magnitude usually, right? So and they are then less susceptible to inflation usually. So, but yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question is from Anthony.
Okay.
Anthony, are you here?
Hello. Hi. I was just wondering how tightly you can tie leaders' restructurings to the actual recession, given that they're taking these restructurings during, an economic peak, especially those that are coming pre-recession. Yeah, like if we think about Miguel's kind of Neiman Marcus, Nordstrom example, is Neiman going to take these restructuring charges irrespective of the recession occurring?
So, okay, this is actually an issue we have thought about. So typically, and this bears verification, but from what we looked at, typically by the time the NBR actually declares a recession, right? So times have already sort of been bad. So for example, in the 2008 recession, the start point is sort of December 2007, right? And firms were already sort of recognizing that they're in for a rough ride. So some firms now, so especially month -3 to month 0, those firms, I can see your concern. Well, are they really being motivated by the recession? Well, our concern was the opposite. Well, if you left them out, were they really being motivated by economic circumstances that turned out to be a recession? So we included them. If we sort of look at month 0 to month 3, by this time, the NBR ex-post, admittedly, but they are calling it a recession already, and use month only 0 to +3 to identify leaders, we would have very similar results. But it's always a judgment call on that, like the empiricist judgment call. How do you define leaders? I cannot rule out what you're saying, right? Maybe they were going to do it anyways. How do I know, right? But ex-post, looking at this data, this is sort of our best pass at it, and we do some robustness with respect to month 0 to month 3 only being used to identify leaders. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. So the next question is from Yini.
Hi, Sugata. Thank you very much for your nice presentation. So my question is, do you see the possibility of regulators playing a role as the recession goes on. So say if PCAOB issue guidance on impairment or going concern issues along the recession, then followers might not only observe leaders' behavior, but also need to consider the compliance issue with the updated guidance.
Right. So, okay. So Ming Yi, is that you?
Yeah.
I didn't catch the name. All right. Hi. Look, as far I'm trying to recall whether there was guidance during the 2001 and 2008 recessions, and I can't think of any. Now, having said that, we should go back and look. That's a good suggestion.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There was guidance issued on goodwill impairments. For example, in the 2008, at least the FASB and the IASB issue guidance for auditors and companies that they had to be very careful and measuring fair values appropriately.
I didn't know about that. Thanks. We're going to have to look into that. I mean, part of it is part of our argument is the followers are observing what's happening in the market and reacting accordingly, right? So it would fit very well with the story. What would be really interesting is if the and Miguel, what you're saying might be helpful in this respect. If the regulators are catching on or want to put more restrictions on what's happening, would that attenuate the behavior? And maybe we have enough data to get at that. Maybe we don't, but we can certainly look at it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. So the next question is from Sundaresh.
Hey, Sundaresh.
Hey, Sugata. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm just curious. I mean, what actual EPS are you using? You're using Street or IBIS EPS for your meet or beat?
Yeah. This is.
So the question is, shouldn't they be taking out restructurings and reversals out of the actual EPS, given that it's only operating stuff? And they, at least the way they take out restructuring charges because it's not anticipated. You may want to be careful about the reversals too, because if it's already out of the actual EPS, then, the whole thing of using a reversal is moot. So it seems like at a minimum, you want to, kind of look at a few of these cases and try and see if the difference between, reported EPS under GAAP and the Street EPS includes the reversals.
We should look at that. I mean, I know that we're sort of being internally consistent, if you will, in what we're doing. We're looking at the target, and then from the target, we're subtracting out reversals, and then seeing what happens without subtracting out reversals. I wish I could say for sure that we have made sure that the reversals are included in the analyst actuals, but I can't say that. So that's something we need to verify. You're absolutely
yeah. The reason is, I mean, IBIS claims they exclude all of those things. That's why, your test kind of hinges on that assumption. So
the number, like on some cases which we looked at as a sample, that wasn't the case, and yeah, so because they are enough to sort of flip status from just miss to just meet or beat, but they're not big enough that it immediately jumps out at the analyst. So for a number of them, it's the case, but I don't know what the systematic answer to your question is. That would be interesting to know. Yeah. So at least what I can tell you is, at least in some cases, those things are in there.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. So the next question is from Tyler.
Yeah. Hi. So you're only looking at kind of the first restructuring charge here, and then you do kind of this residual robustness test to see if they're kind of over restructuring. But I was thinking, is it possible that like these firms that, do these restructuring charges, then reverse them, then they just have another restructuring charge in the following quarters? And that if we really want to look at maybe, okay, how much of this restructuring charge is inflated, you know, you want to use the percentage over the entire recession, you know, with these subsequent restructuring events to see, all right, how much did they actually reverse on net versus, okay, they reversed it one time, but then they accrued more, you know, the next quarter or the following periods.
I mean, we could look at leaders that have multiple large restructuring charges, right? And then see what happens if on the charges that came before versus the charges that came after. It's just that you run out of sample very quickly. And so then I, you know, so one cool thing, I'm thinking aloud here in response to your comment, to check might be that, you know, what do leaders' charges look like when they report in the month -3 to +3 period versus in the month +4 to +8 or +18 period, right? That would be an interesting comparison. It's just that I don't know we have enough of them to work with, but definitely we could do that.
Yeah, and I guess I was thinking of just, you know, keeping the sample that you have and just saying, all right, rather than looking at, you know, just that one restructuring charge and the subsequent reversal, you know, combine all of the restructuring charges and reversals over the 18-month period and using, you know, that as a metric.
I don't know. It would be tough to tie the reversal back to the restructuring. I mean, that's another problem that you would run into, is if a leader sort of reports multiple restructuring charge, it's really hard to tell, or any firm, right?
Sure.
It's very hard to tell which one's being reversed, right? That's the other issue, now that I think about it more. You know, it's a nice thought. I've had at least some similar thoughts while working on the paper. I know that in practice, when you start doing the empirical exercise, you run into some complications with this multiple restructuring charges, which is why we stayed away from them.
Sure.
Yeah.
This thought, yeah.
Thank you. So we have time for one more question from Sarab.
Okay.
Hey, Sugata. I was just thinking about these peer effects more, and it seems like the current treatment is that this is a common shock to all firms, which I feel like is going to make identifying a peer effect difficult. And I was wondering if you could exploit variation in how badly certain firms were affected. So I recall this paper in the QJE, and they look at firms that had banking relationships, and some firms had relationships with unhealthy banks or that were hit harder during the crisis. So I was wondering if you could use that sort of, and you know, those firms that did have more exposure to those unhealthy banks had difficulty raising capital, they laid off more employees, which kind of has that restructuring flavor. So I was thinking if you could use something like that sort of exposure, argue that it's plausibly exogenous to instrument for being a leader, and then you still documented these significant reversals, I feel like that might get you closer to identifying a peer effect.
Okay. Wait, so where would the peer effect come from? Sorry?
If you were still sort of engaging in this strategic reversal behavior, even though your exposure to lenders was healthy, versus, and you know, whereas the leader in your industry, actually, the reason they had a restructuring was because they had this specific exposure to an unhealthy lender, which doesn't necessarily sort of transfer to you.
So you're saying essentially, if I understand you right, find the wedge between why leaders are reporting restructurings and why followers are reporting restructuring. So you're using the example of a lender, but it could be some other factor too, conceivably, where leaders are reporting because they have to, and the followers didn't really have to, right? Report a restructuring.
Yeah, that's where I was going.
And yeah, see, we have wished for something like that. We have yet to come upon something systematic that sort of fulfills that criterion. So this idea of did they have to or not, and we can, you know, we have a certain set of economic variables that are capturing economic circumstances. I think it is a good idea to add institutional detail to that of the type you were suggesting. Like we have book to market and size. Well, instead of that, we could look at something more specific, like relationship with banks, etc. But it would be nice to think of, you know, whether there are enough such variables to get enough leaders and sample, enough of a sample of followers that didn't have to do this, right? Which would, and enough of a sample of leaders that had to report a restructuring. So yeah, I mean, point well taken. It's we'll have to think more about it in terms of data. Yeah.
Well, we already passed time, but we have just one question left, so maybe if we do it quick.
Yep.
Yeah. Jason, do you want to ask a question?
Hey, yeah. Hey, Sugata. How's it going?
Doing well. How are you?
Good, good. Yeah, and sorry for taking us over time, but just a really quick question, kind of related to some of the things brought up in the past. But conceptually, I mean, can you talk a little bit about what the incentives are for somebody to be a leader? Like you gave a lot of advantages to being a follower, like your tennis example. So it's not clear why somebody would try to get make the restructuring decisions or disclosure decisions early on after recession.
Yeah, we don't. That's fair. In the paper, well, I didn't. In the paper, we talk about it a little bit more. So the cost to being a follower, if you will, is that you're allowing the recession to get worse, right? The economic conditions could get worse. Your peer firms have already restructured. They're in a better position to capture future competitiveness. This could be a reason why you are missing analyst forecasts in the first place, and you need to rely on reversals. So leaders definitely have benefits, right? And this was my effort to kind of highlight some of them. Now, what we took out of that for our paper is that they're making endogenous decisions on the investment side, right? So we don't think that they're deciding when to take the decision to restructure based on, oh, can we inflate charges or not? They are sort of they are instead relying on what kind of a firm do we want to be. Can we resolve uncertainty enough at the beginning of the recession that we want to get ahead of the others in the game and be proactive? Do we have to? So this is, you know, in line with the bank comment earlier. Like, do we have to do a restructuring? Do we have a choice? So the leaders are firms like that. The followers are saying, well, we don't really have to. We can afford to wait. Let's wait to see what the peers are doing. So that would be sort of our, you know, cutting mechanism, if you will. Does that sort of get at your question a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll end here. Sugata, thank you very much for presenting your research. Everyone else, thank you for joining and participating. If you have any questions or comments, please email them to Sugata and his co-authors. Also, everyone have a very nice Memorial Day weekend.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Good seeing you and very helpful on the paper. Thank you.
Thank you.